Step on up, sit down, twist off that bottle top or crack open that can, and welcome to Porch Matters. This is Terry Cagle coming to you from my back porch. Yes sir, yes ma'am, the name of this show is authentic. On Porch Matters, our saying is this: big issues or just a friendly conversation. No topic is off limits. We take pride in being able to talk about anything with each other in an open discussion. Open discussion is one of the only ways to learn. Your perspective could be changed. You could change the perspective of others. Friends and family, welcome back to another episode of Porch Matters. I'm glad you're here. I got the sun shining in my face. Birds and bumblebees are flying around. I got my aunt and my uncle riding around on a four-wheeler looking all kinds of precious. The only thing I can complain about right now is all the pollen I have had to sweep off this porch. Easter has come and gone, and for us Christians, we celebrate the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. I hope everyone was able to spend quality time with family or loved ones. Hopefully some of you found a few of those money eggs in the Easter egg hunts. I got a question for you. How many of you purposely hid some of those eggs where the kids couldn't get to them? It can't be just me. I went up to Stacy's and spent time with her and her family. I grilled for the first time this year. According to them, it was pretty good, but I think they just said that because they didn't have to do it. I also got to help them hide a few eggs for their Easter egg hunt. It was a pretty good day. Both the Snyder Cut of Justice League and Godzilla vs. Kong have come out. I loved the Snyder Cut. Might not be the popular opinion for most, but I seriously enjoyed it more than Endgame. I'm more invested in the DC characters than I am the Marvel characters, because I've been a DC guy all my life. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed Endgame, but my favorite part, much like other people, was the battle scene at the end. Godzilla vs. Kong was real awesome too. Loved the story. Loved seeing those two go at it. Which team were you on? Team Godzilla or Team Kong? Me personally, I was all about some Team Godzilla. I like Kong, but Godzilla's my man. I really like him. Speaking of other things that I like, I really liked the conversation that I had that I'm bringing to you this week. Not too bad of a segue, was it? On this episode, I welcome H Marty Schelper to the porch. She is the Alabama chapter president of Republicans Against Marijuana Prohibition. We talk about marijuana. We talk about some of the history and the uses of it, why marijuana got banned, and what she and her group are doing to get legislation passed to bring medicinal marijuana back. There are some hiccups in the audio, I'm going to go ahead and tell you. Sorry, but that happens. Did the best that I could with it. But I really enjoyed this conversation, and I think you will too. Without further ado, let's get started. Miss Marty Schelper, how are you doing tonight? And welcome to the porch.
Well, thank you so much. I actually am sitting out on the porch as we do this podcast because I wanted it to be authentic.
Well, thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that. That view back there looks pretty.
It's gorgeous. I live in East Central Alabama. I moved here about 10 years ago after my sister passed away, and I just absolutely love the state of Alabama. I do want to thank you, Terry, and Porch Matters. I'm seeing y'all on Twitter and on Facebook and social media, and we, Alabama Republicans Against Marijuana Prohibition, appreciate you providing us an opportunity to participate in this podcast. We really do appreciate it, and thank you.
Well, I appreciate you coming on because it's actually a topic that I've been wanting to delve into. The podcast is still small, but we're growing by leaps and bounds, and I'm just thrilled to death to be here. I'm living a dream.
I hear you. And life is all about small steps, and that's what's happening with the legislation in the state of Alabama on therapeutic cannabis. Small steps.
This podcast is about having topics and having discussions, and I think that discussions in themselves are a lost art. There are truths in this world, but as far as to a degree, whatever I believe and whatever you believe, sometimes we don't always agree on everything, but it just seems like today's day and age, whatever anybody necessarily thinks, they're right because of their opinion on social media and everything. And the art of discussion seems to be a lost art these days. And I'm just trying to do a small step in bringing it back.
And I'd like to add something to that too. I think in our public school system, I call them government indoctrination centers personally, but we've lost the understanding of freedom, liberty, and justice. And where my freedom and liberty and justice ends is where your freedom and liberty and justice begins. So if we could ever get back to that point for people to realize, we may not agree on everything. That's okay. As long as what I'm doing doesn't infringe upon you or what you're doing doesn't infringe upon me, I don't see what the issue is if you're not doing something that's criminal.
I agree wholeheartedly.
And then we want to talk about cannabis.
Yes, ma'am, we do. Going back to, you thanking me, I really do thank you for coming onto the porch and actually talking about this. I saw your page and everything on the Libertarian Party of Alabama Facebook page, and I started reading on it. And I've always been, especially the last few years since it's ramped up as much as it has, I've been fascinated about cannabis. I've never personally used it. I've used, as far as the smoking of it and everything else, I guess I was a sheltered boy to a degree, but I have used some of the CBD pills, and I experienced, I'm not, as far as it made me feel better. And I had a guest on, he was actually fixing to open up a CBD business where he was able to sell some stuff. But as far as the legislation and the advocacy of recreational marijuana and everything like that, it's been fascinating to me. It's something that I don't understand for the life of me why it ever became illegal to begin with, because allegedly in this country, we're supposed to have freedoms and whatnot. And I personally might not partake of it. You might personally partake of it. Who am I to tell you that you can't do something like that with your body?
It all started in the early 1900s, prior to the 1937 Marijuana Tax Act, and you might want to look that up. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt was president at the time, and he actually signed the 1937 Marijuana Tax Act. But prior to that, cannabis has an ancient history. No matter what your religious belief is, I happen to be a Christian. I also happen to be a libertarian. I'm not a Republican, even though I am the president of Alabama Republicans Against Marijuana Prohibition. But cannabis has an ancient history. In my religious beliefs, I believe that God put the plant here for the healing of the nations. He put it here for us to be able to heal our bodies. And prior to 1937, there were 100 different conditions that physicians, prior to the Marijuana Tax Act, recommended cannabis for those 100 conditions. They didn't prescribe it. It was available as a product, but it was not a prescription. But one of the reasons that cannabis was prohibited in 1937 was because of the pharmaceutical companies and the timber industry, because hemp was a threat to the timber industry, and people made canvas, they made paper. There's all kinds of things that can be made from hemp, industrial hemp. But the pharmaceutical companies didn't like the fact that cannabis could actually heal the body via the endocannabinoid system. And every mammal has an endocannabinoid system, just like they have a respiratory system. And I believe that God gave us the endocannabinoid system. So when the pharmaceutical companies began to realize that they could create synthetic medications and they could sell those for a great profit, they wanted to be in on the Marijuana Tax Act. So President Franklin Delano Roosevelt hired a gunslinger for himself. His name was Harry Anslinger. And they started a campaign to demonize the plant cannabis. They came up with all this propaganda. There was a video out there about reefer madness. The list goes on and on and on. And they demonized cannabis. They made the public believe, and they made our legislators in Washington, D.C. believe that cannabis was as dangerous as heroin. I've been a user of cannabis. I'm 61. I've been a user of cannabis for 45 or 46 years. And people count back and they think, wow, she was young. Okay, in the 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, when I was in high school, I probably smoked pot once a day. I graduated. I was valedictorian in my graduating class. So when people say that cannabis destroys brain cells, I'm clear indication that it did not. You know, might not be the sharpest knife in the drawer, and I might not be the brightest bulb in the box. But I did graduate as valedictorian in my graduating class. So that's kind of how cannabis became demonized. And then in 1969, Leary versus, I can't think it was the United States, he actually was able to change all of that legislation. But then about the end of cannabis, about cannabis prohibition. But then in 1973, when Richard Nixon came in office, he made cannabis illegal. So what you're seeing around the United States, because cannabis is still classified as a Schedule I drug with heroin, which is insane. But what you're seeing around the United States, because of states' rights, and I'm a Southerner, states' rights are very important to us as a state, but they've gone against the federal government in saying, you know, you may not think that this is something that's beneficial, and I'm talking about therapeutic cannabis. But we as a state and our citizens believe that it is. And that's where we are today in the state of Alabama.
It's a shame. You know, I read somewhere, you know, Jesse Ventura actually put out a book called The Marijuana Manifesto. And if you
I did not know that.
Oh, yeah, he wrote about it and actually did a lot of research on it based off of somebody in his family actually having seizures. And they had went through all kinds of doctors and everything else. And then finally they stumbled upon medical marijuana, and the medical marijuana was actually able to, I don't know if it necessarily cured the seizures, but it was able to treat the seizures positively anyway. His foreword was written by a man, I can't remember his name right now to save my life, but he had terminal cancer, and he claims that the marijuana was actually what saved his life.
Did it happen to be a gentleman by the name of Rick Simpson? Does that ring a bell?
That name sounds familiar. Yes, but I can't just,
okay, well,
if you put a gun to my head and ask me for the correct name, I couldn't give it to you right now. But he wrote, like I said, he wrote a book, and he was talking about different types of uses and everything that the plant actually has. And he even makes mention, I don't know if it's for sure or not, but even I think the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence was actually written on hemp paper.
Absolutely. And our founding fathers farmed cannabis. They farmed cannabis. People paid their taxes with cannabis. There was actually legislation that people had to grow cannabis. This is all so bizarre, and it's because people are not educated on the topic.
I think it boils down to something that Jesse Ventura has said for years: follow the money. As you said a while ago, the pharmaceutical industry and everything, they can't make any money if there happens to be a natural grown plant or a plant that you can grow yourself and everything to be able to treat some of the stuff that marijuana can treat. What all kinds of diseases or sicknesses and everything can you think of right off the top of your head that marijuana can actually treat or cure?
Well, a lot of people go crazy when you use the word cure. You know, even the medical doctors, you know, you take the chemotherapy, you know, have no signs of cancer in the body, and they never use the word cure. But I use the word heal, okay? And let me start a little bit with my personal story and why I'm so passionate about this. And I do spend 10 to 14 hours a day on cannabis advocacy. My sister had cancer. She went through chemotherapy and it almost killed her. But supposedly she didn't have any signs of cancer. And then she went back about 6 months later to have some tests done, and the cancer had come back and it was all over her body. Okay, I did not know about the medicinal properties of cannabis at the time. It was a recreational thing.
Right.
So while she was sick there in her last round of chemotherapy, and I was in the office with her when she got this diagnosis from her oncologist, she went into a state of shock and she asked the oncologist one question: how long do I have to live? And he patted her on the leg. He reached over and patted her on her knee and said, don't worry about dying of the cancer. The chemotherapy is going to kill you. So when I tell my story about my sister, I don't say she died of cancer. I tell them she died of chemotherapy poisoning. I mean, I got that from a guy in a white coat, right? And chemotherapy is a big moneymaker. And people do not want to hear that it's profit over lives. But it is. And it's not just with cancer. It's with people who have autism. It's people who have Parkinson's. These are some of the things that cannabis does treat. And sometimes the body heals itself via the endocannabinoid system. And every mammal on the planet has an endocannabinoid system, just like they have a respiratory system. There's a doctor in Israel. His name is Raphael Meshulam. And I think he is the one who discovered the endocannabinoid system. And you were talking about using CBD products, and people know CBD because it's all over the news. But that's one molecule in cannabis. CBD is cannabidiol. It's one cannabinoid, and there's over 400 molecular cannabinoids inside of the cannabis plant. So when you isolate the CBD, you're only getting the effect that that CBD can have on your body. But when you take something called full extract cannabis oil, you're receiving over 400 of those molecules, those cannabinoids in the cannabis plant. You're getting them all. They work synergistically together inside the human body to heal the body. So we were talking about cannabis, Parkinson's, PTSD, irritable bowel syndrome. Any condition that you can possibly have in the human body is a reaction from your body from something that is causing your autoimmune system to cause you to be sick. And most people don't know the word homeostasis, but when most children are born, their body is in a perfect state of homeostasis, which we want our bodies to remain in a state of homeostasis. But we eat things that aren't good for us. We drink things that aren't good for us. We breathe pollution. And over a period of time, our body starts to develop different conditions and diseases. So, and I just want to, I know you probably want to chime in on this, but one thing that we have right now, everybody talks about healthcare. We haven't had healthcare since the early 1900s. We have disease management care. When someone goes to the doctor and you tell the doctor you have a condition, he automatically starts looking at a book called a PDR that has all the prescription pills that you could possibly imagine a pharmaceutical company to sell, trying to figure out what kind of prescription he could give you that's going to have suicidal tendencies, that's going to cause another health problem that you're going to have to go back to the doctor to get another prescription. That's not health care. That's disease management care.
I'd go even a step further. I don't even think it's necessarily disease management. I think it's symptom treatment, because they hear your symptoms and then they give you a pill to treat symptoms. They don't treat the problem. They treat the symptoms of the problem.
Exactly. And I've got a little key phrase that I use a lot, and it makes some people cringe, but pharmaceutical companies are the largest legal drug cartel in the world. They can sell you something that's one molecule away from a methamphetamine. They can get you strung out on opioids. They can get you strung out on benzodiazepines. They can give you something for cholesterol that actually causes your cholesterol to go up. I mean, I could go on and on and on, and people aren't getting well. They're not being becoming healthy. So I don't know. You can't call that health care. Nobody will ever be able to convince me of that. And I'm not saying that all pharmaceuticals are bad. If you're in an emergency situation, let's say you have a car accident, you're in critical condition, you need antibiotics, you need the things that the pharmaceutical companies have developed over time. But that doesn't mean that you need them all the time. You just need to get out of that critical condition that you're in, start taking care of your endocannabinoid system when the time presents itself, and your body can heal itself. God created this body for this body to be able to repair itself. And you may not be aware of this, and this is a little tidbit. People used to, when people farmed hemp, they gave the hemp stalks and the excess that they didn't need off of the cannabis plants and fed it to their cows and their pigs. And we, in turn, when we ate those pigs or drank that milk, got the cannabinoids that those animals used, and it came out of the animals. So we were drinking milk that had cannabinoids in it. We were eating bacon that had cannabinoids in it, if that makes any sense.
Makes perfect sense to me. It really does. There's possibly some people that are listening to this podcast that have heard you use the phrase endocannabinoid system. And I know myself, I'm just a simple truck driver. I know a little bit about bodies and healths and everything. My girlfriend constantly asks me, where did I get my medical degree? I just tell her I stayed at a Holiday Inn Express. But if you would, could you could you explain to the listeners what an endocannabinoid system is?
I sure will. And when you say you're just a simple truck driver, I want you to know that truck drivers are very underrated. You are what moved the freight across the United States. So there is nothing simple about that. Driving on the interstates in these cities, there's nothing simple about that. My hat is off to you.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that. Truck drivers don't get the respect that they deserve.
You're the backbone.
That's a podcast in itself. If trucks were to stop rolling, this country wouldn't survive a week.
Amen, brother. But on the endocannabinoid system, okay, every human being has, they're inside of the body, on all the organs of the body, lungs, the pancreas, the kidneys, the bladder, the brain, all over your body is something called CB receptors. And the cannabinoids that are in the cannabis plant attach themselves to these cannabinoid receptors. There's CB1 and CB2, meaning cannabinoid receptors 1, cannabinoid receptors 2. So when you consume these cannabinoids, and we're not talking about inhalation, we're talking about sublingual, you're taking this medication orally. These cannabinoids, when they go into the body, attach themselves to these CB receptors, the cannabinoid receptors. The CB receptors are part of the endocannabinoid system. So when it's like, sometimes your doctor will tell you, well, I think you need to take some B12, or maybe you need to take some vitamin D. Okay, it's because your body is deficient of whatever that mineral or whatever that vitamin is. And they're recommending that you take these supplements to build that back up. Mothers, when they breastfeed their children, actually have cannabinoids in their breast milk that they give to their infants. So tell me why there was such an outcry from doctors saying that mothers should not breastfeed their children, because they were getting those cannabinoids. So I always I didn't know what I know now about the therapeutic benefits of cannabis, but I always wondered, why would they not want a mother to do the most natural thing, which is to give the child the breast milk that the mother produced for that child, instead of drying it up and putting it on formula, which sells formula. But our bodies are deficient of cannabinoids. Just like you might be deficient of a vitamin or a mineral, our bodies are deficient of cannabinoids because we have been denied access to this plant. And I'm going to go so far as to say that this has been a crime against humanity. against the world. Every human being has been denied access to something that they have used for centuries. This is ancient. So, if you want to get into conspiracy theories, and I'm a conspiracy theorist, I believe that there's a reason why they didn't want us to have access to this, so we would be sick and that we would need all of these pharmaceutical drugs.
I've been accused of being a conspiracy theorist a time or two.
Nothing wrong with that, brother.
I like to do what you call critical thinking. Just because somebody says something to me, I don't always take it as gospel, especially if they are elected officials and or bureaucrats. So,
do you know who coined the phrase conspiracy theorist?
If my memory serves me correctly from my readings and research, it actually came from the CIA in order to throw truth tellers off.
During the Warren Commission, the assassination of JFK, when people did not want to believe, and we're getting off topic, but when people did not want to believe their narrative, they coined us conspiracy theorists. So I love critical thinking. When you think about your body being deficient of something and you see follow the money, like you said, and you see why it's deficient and we've been denied access to it, that's critical thinking.
Yes, ma'am. I've always been that way. My parents taught me a long time ago to look at all four sides of things. That was one thing that my dad always told me. He said a box always has four sides. Look at every side.
Right.
That's just the way that I came up. It is what it is, and I don't apologize for it. But as far as...
Right, and I don't apologize. I don't apologize for it either. So when you're talking about the endocannabinoid system and you're talking about this critical thinking that I have done, I have to go back to medical schools, okay? Our doctors and our PhDs and our nurses and anybody that works in the medical field that goes to medical school, the pharmaceutical companies own those medical schools. The pharmaceutical company writes the textbooks that they use in those medical schools. They are not being trained on the endocannabinoid system. They do not want it being uttered in any of those medical schools. They do not want anyone talking about the endocannabinoid system. So, you think about why it was prohibited to begin with, and then you want to start talking about they don't know anything about the endocannabinoid system. And people can say all day long, the research is not out there, we don't know enough about it. That's not true. That is not true. And when I was talking about my sister, I want people within the sound of my voice to think about this, because people say, oh, this hasn't been FDA approved. What are we doing? Letting people use something that hasn't been FDA approved. Okay, I would rather have a person who had anecdotal evidence and was alive. They were anecdotally, illegally alive. Let's say because they didn't have legalization in their state or therapeutic cannabis wasn't available. So they're anecdotally, illegally alive. I would be happier that way than I would to be legally, clinically dead. What do you think about that? I'd rather be alive than dead, even if it was illegal. And I know people that have treated some of those symptoms that we had talked about. A friend had peritoneal cancer. She had been given a death sentence. She had peritoneal cancer. She told her oncologist, yes, I'll do the chemo, but I want you to know I'm illegally using full extract cannabis oil. And 2 months after her treatment started with those two things, the cannabis oil and the chemotherapy, she went back to the doctor just for a checkup. They check your blood or whatever, I guess, to find out if the cancer's progressing, if the chemo's killing you or whatever. And she had no signs of cancer in her body after 2 months of taking the full extract cannabis oil. Now, some people may say, oh, well, it was probably the chemo. No, it wasn't the chemo, because the doctor had already told her she was going to die. They were just trying to prolong her life. But yet they continued to pump that poison, that chemotherapy, into her body. And the chemotherapy almost killed her, and she didn't have any cancer in her body. So why continue to give her chemo? But she's not the only one that I know that has had their body healed from cancer. Absolutely, follow the money trail. Profit over loss.
Right.
And it infuriates me. And I had I want to say this. I had a cannabis advocate about 4 months ago who I was doing an interview with, a friend at the time. And she, in the midst of an interview, the person who was interviewing me asked me, who did I think the biggest blowback was? Who did I think we were getting the most blowback from? And I started talking about the pharmaceutical companies. Well, my friend who had invited me to the interview said, oh, no, stop. We've got to stop. Glad this is not going live. We can't talk about the pharmaceutical companies. And I acquiesced because I was an invited guest to the interview. But I made up my mind right then. If I ever did an interview again and I couldn't talk about pharmaceutical companies, I didn't care anything about doing the interview because I'm a truth seeker.
Right.
And I want the truth to be revealed about the endocannabinoid system. And I want the truth to be revealed about who is preventing us from having access to this.
Until you mentioned it, I had never heard of it. Just being honest with you.
Yeah.
I didn't know it existed.
But I am a libertarian. I am with an organization called Republicans Against Marijuana Prohibition. We have chapters in numerous states, and most people are like, Republicans Against Marijuana Prohibition? Well, there's plenty of Republicans out there that are in the proverbial closet that do not want any but their neighbors to know. They don't want their friends to know. They don't want their family to know. They don't want the people at the church to know. They don't want people that they work with to know that they use cannabis. Nobody has a monopoly on cannabis. No. Those people need to come out of the closet. They need to stand up. They need to speak out, and they need to let their voices be heard, because in the state of Alabama, every piece of legislation, cannabis legislation that has been passed, has not been passed or sponsored by a Democrat. Every piece of legislation, cannabis legislation in the state of Alabama, has been sponsored by a Republican. And
the Alabama Democratic Party has been pretty much non-existent for the last decade or so anyway.
And we do have one senator in the state. His name is Bobby Singleton. He did sponsor legislation, Senate Bill 149, and it's a decriminalization. Like if you have an ounce, it's never like a felony, I don't think. It's a misdemeanor, and you just pay a fine like a traffic ticket. But my whole bone of contention of that is, if you've ever bought any weed, you might buy, a half an ounce, or you might buy an ounce. But the person that you're purchasing that from doesn't just like go and get an ounce and bring you an ounce. They've got pounds of it. So the person who's buying it, yeah, you're going to get off easy. The person that you're purchasing it from is a person who's going to go to jail. And nobody should be going to jail for a plant. I
agree wholeheartely.
I wish I had known all about this, because I could have saved my sister's life. I know that I could have saved my sister's life. Not meaning I could have done it, just meaning that if I had known that this had healing properties, I would have moved heaven and earth to have gotten it for her. I would have gone to jail, even though it was illegal, to make sure that my sister had what she needed for her body to heal itself. And I want the people that are within the sound of my voice to write, call, email their legislators. If they go to our Facebook page, Alabama Republicans Against Marijuana Prohibition, we have so much information out there to guide people on how to contact their legislators. And they need to be contacted now, because this legislation is actually, it passed in the Senate. It has moved on to the Alabama House. It had to actually go through 2 committees before it could even go to the House floor for debate. Right now, it's sitting in the Judiciary Committee. And Wednesday, March 17th, they're going to vote. The Judiciary Committee is going to vote whether the Compassion Act, is the name of the legislation, can move on to the House Health Committee. We're just praying it gets out of the Judiciary Committee so that it can move on to the House Committee, because until it goes through these 2 committees, it can't even be debated on the floor of the House. And I didn't mean to take over the interview.
This isn't an interview, ma'am. This is a discussion, and it's fantastic. And I appreciate you being here. Yeah.
I appreciate you letting me talk.
I've done just a little bit of research on the Compassion Act from your page, but there's probably a lot of listeners that have not even heard of it, sad to say. But if you would, could you go into a little bit of the pros and the cons of the Compassion Act on how they've got it wrote up? But the reason why I say cons is because I, like you, know how Alabama politicians are. We're the only state in this area that absolutely has no lottery, and that's another podcast for another time. They wrote up a lot. They finally wrote up some a bill to try and get it in, and it and it didn't pass. Granted, one of the people that wrote, I can't talk for nothing. One of the people that wrote it up made it to where part of the she's laughing at me if you can't hear, wrote it up to where part of the money went into the general fund. Now, most Alabamians know anytime a representative writes up a bill for money to go into the general fund, it's not a good thing. But so I'm chasing that rabbit hole. But if you could explain to the people some pros and some cons of the bill.
Well, because we're in the South, because we're in the Bible Belt, and I do want to remind people, I am a Christian, okay? Now, and I don't hide that from anybody. And sometimes people might hear things fly out of my mouth and look at me and think, wow, I can't believe she's a Christian. But me and Jesus, we've got our own thing going, okay?
That's all that matters right there.
What we have in the Bible.
That's all that matters. That talking about church is an entirely different podcast right now. I am a Christian. I grew up in the church. I love the Lord, but at the same time, not a huge fan of the way churches are doing things these days. And I'm going to leave it at that because I'll be talking for about 2 hours.
Okay, well, let's talk about that again sometime because I'd really like to. What we have here in the South is we have a moral dilemma. We have a moral dilemma on many, many things. Okay, the legislators, let me digress for a minute. There's something called initiative and referendum, and it's part of your state constitution. When this country was founded and the original 13 colonies became states, they didn't even think about initiative and referendum, or if they did, somebody thought it wasn't necessary to put that into the Constitution. And what it allows the citizens of those states to do, instead of being governed by legislators and they determine what they think is important, a citizen can actually say, this is something that we need to vote on. So when the settlers started moving west and went across the Mississippi River, the states that were founded realized that something very important to their state constitution was left out, and they added initiative and referendum so that their states could vote. Like Mississippi just passed a therapeutic cannabis law because they promoted the initiative and they wanted to vote on that. Now, they had to gather signatures. It's not easy, but initiative and referendum is very important. So let's go back to the moral dilemma. When you live in the Bible Belt and you have legislators that have morals, their morals that they want to impose on someone else, and in so doing, prevent you from actually living free with liberty and justice and the pursuit of happiness, they're imposing their moral beliefs onto other people. What we have with cannabis, and the reason that it's a moral dilemma, is because in their minds, people have been brainwashed thinking that cannabis is this bad thing, when they really need to educate themselves on the ancient history of cannabis and how cannabis has been used through the ages. And even in the Bible, God talks about cannabis, and he calls it cannabism. It's Kaneh, cannabism. And when you look at the Greek of it, it's cannabis. And bosom is spelled B-O-S-M, if there's anybody out there writing this down. But cannabism is in the Bible. But yet people have these, and I hate to call people small-minded, but they really are. It's like they go through their life with blinders on, and they think if they do X, Y, Z, and they don't do A, B, C, and I don't mean that as a slam against alcoholic beverages, because people should have that right. They think if they only do X, Y, Z, that, you know, there's going to be like some kind of like their life is perfect if they impose upon everybody else that they only experience XYZ. But people need this for their health. I mean, the Compassion Act is legislation that provides therapeutic medicinal cannabis to patients. Now, it's a convoluted process. It's heavily regulated. A person who wants to utilize cannabis for their health has to go to a doctor and pay for a doctor's appointment because insurance will not cover this. The doctor can recommend them to a cannabis registry. They have to pay for a card to have this cannabis registry. I don't know if it's going to be an annual fee or if it's going to be every 2 years, but it's going to be $60 just to purchase this card so you can go into a cannabis dispensary and purchase medicinal cannabis products. Isolates, meaning like full extract cannabis oil. There's going to be some edibles. Everybody loves laughing because there's a product in the Compassion Act that nobody really understands or believes, and really, unless you've really dug deep into the medicinal properties of cannabis, but it's suppositories. You know, everybody wants flower. They want to smoke pot, but that's not part of this legislation. We had to get our foot in the door before we could even move forward. I mean, they just don't want, it's just, I can't even fathom it. I can't think of, but suppositories is a great application for people to use who have cancer, colon cancer. They have cancer of the ovaries. They have uterine cancer. Someone who has females who have endometriosis. Using suppositories is an excellent way because you want to get those cannabinoids inside the mucosis of the body as close to the cancer as you possibly can. So people want to laugh about suppositories. So you go to the doctor, you get your card, you go to the dispensary, there's going to be some products available to you. They're regulating how many milligrams of THC, that people can take in a day. Think about people who are strung out on opiates, which cannabis can, take somebody off of opiates, with no withdrawal symptoms. But people are strung out on opioids and they're dying or committing suicide because they want to get off of opioids, or they take too many of them and have an accidental overdose when they could be using cannabis. So the Compassion Act is sponsored by Senator Tim Melton. He's in Florence, Alabama, and he's my hero. He has really fought hard. This is his third legislative session trying to get this legislation passed. And is it a perfect piece of legislation? Because I have people tell me they're not supporting it. No, it's not perfect. Out of 36 states in the union that have passed medicinal cannabis legislation, none of it has been perfect. The state of Oklahoma may have come the closest, and I think they've had legal medicinal cannabis for 18 months or 2 years. They have come the closest. So if there's somebody out there who needs access that thinks that they need to become a medical refugee, they can move to Oklahoma, because some people who are sick, suffering, and dying in the States do move out of state because they don't have access. So the moral dilemma is what we're really fighting against in the pharmaceutical companies and law enforcement agencies. They do not want to see this become legal.
Speaking from somebody who used to wear a badge, I was a corrections officer for 10 years. Going back to what you was talking about as far as the opioids and stuff like that, the Washington Post actually came down a few years ago and did a story on Walker County and talked about how per capita, if my memory serves me correctly, because it's been a minute since I read that article, but Walker County,
the highest in the nation.
Yes. At one point in time, and it's probably still the same, opioids are used as currency in a lot of instances. It's bad.
Right, absolutely.
And
it's so sad because cannabis is not addictive. Cannabis is not addictive. I don't care what anybody says. Food can be addictive. Alcohol can be addictive. Maybe people get some kind of psychological. It's physically not addictive.
I can attest to food being addictive because I'm a fat boy. I'm a glutton. I can't help it. I love me some food.
Southern cooking.
I am not that picky. Other people that might be listening to this that are close to me might say that I am, but whatever it is that I love, I eat a ton of it. I love a good buffet.
Well, and I love a good buffet at a cannabis dispensary. I would love to go into a cannabis dispensary like I was shopping for my vegetables. Cannabis should be regulated like tomatoes. Tomatoes aren't regulated. I mean, it's something you can grow in your garden. People juice the cannabis leaves, the fan leaves that are on the plant. They're not hallucinogenic. People juice them for the supplemental, it's almost like vitamins and minerals that they get out of it. The cannabinoids that are in the leaves, they juice it. Some people eat it on salad. Some people cook it in food. I just don't understand why somebody can go to the ABC store and on a Friday night and buy a fifth of whiskey, get drunk, do heaven knows what, and it's legal. But and cannabis is very calming to people. It doesn't make people aggressive. It makes them think. Sometimes they're introspective. Cannabis is just a very peaceful plant that has had a war. Cannabis has been fighting to come back, and I try to remind people it's been 84 years since it was prohibited. And inside of the cannabis community, I know there are a lot of advocates out there saying, "Oh, look what we're doing! We're making all this headway," and we are. I mean, I see an end to this in sight. It may not be in my lifetime because I don't know how long I'll live. But we have to remember that in the 84 years since this plant has been prohibited, there have been cannabis advocates that have come and gone before us, and they fought very, very hard. We stand on their shoulders. We're not doing anything now that we could have done without the help that they provided to us for the past 84 years. And I never want to forget them. There's a cannabis advocate from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. His name was Jack Herer, Herer. And I'm giving this information to you, Terry, but I'm giving it to everybody out there. You can Google his name, Jack Herer. He wrote a book called The Emperor Wears No Clothes. And it's 187 pages. If you love to read, and you can download it, the PDF for free. You don't have to buy the book. It's free. When he passed away, his wife made that book available to everybody. It's from beginning to end on why cannabis was ever prohibited. It goes into great detail. I mean, it's just a page burner. There's some stuff out there, as in any book, because it did get off on some politics a little bit, which really wasn't my cup of tea. But Jack Herer was an amazing cannabis advocate, and I am so grateful for him and anybody that came before us, because I really and truly believe that I was called to advocate for cannabis because of the death of my sister. And people can believe that or not believe that, or I really don't care. But I really believe that God called me to this, and it's a heavy burden to carry. And sometimes because I'm so passionate and I'm so vocal, people might mistake that as being aggressive. I'm not aggressive. I am an advocate for life. I want people to be able to live and to be healthy. I don't want their families to have to suffer their loss. And I really want an end to this insanity. I mean, it makes me crazy. Years ago, when I first started this, and I've been doing this for 8.5 years, I would cry myself to sleep at night. I mean, and I would just cry out to God, and I would just say, what can I do? And God told me in so many words, I was just a seed planter. I was taking it way too personally. You cannot lead a horse to water and make them drink. And he let me know that he germinates that seed. So I just continue to advocate. I talk to people, every day in the grocery store. If I hear somebody talking about a condition, I ask them if they know about the endocannabinoid system. I tell them about my cannabis advocacy. And when I start getting the deer in the headlights look like they don't want to talk to me about it anymore, I stop, because I'm just a seed planter.
That's it. going back to what you was talking about as far as alcohol goes and why they can go to the ABC store. If they can get into the
Mhm.
ABC store past like 7 or 8 o'clock, it's a miracle because they shut up shop quicker than just about anybody. But if you can get in, it all boils back just like we started out with. Follow the money. They can go to that ABC store and
Right.
buy whatever alcohol they want to because the state is going to be getting tax dollars off of it.
That's why it's so heavily controlled and regulated.
Yeah. Once Colorado went and made weed or made cannabis, as you say, illegal, and states started seeing the money that was generated by the state of Colorado, that's when everything started blooming. Why? They saw another revenue stream, plain and simple.
Right, exactly.
And once this state can see that is another revenue stream, as bad as it is, because there, as you have talked about this whole episode, how there's positive effects for this plant. Most of them don't care about the medicinal purposes of this. Only thing they're looking for is the money, and that's the sad truth of
Right.
it, I think.
Right. Well, I've always been, since my sister died, because you can grow the plant, you can extract the full extract cannabis oil yourself. I mean, there's a process to do it. There's recipes. People can go online if you want to take the risk of buying an illegal plant and making a healing product to heal your body or the body of someone that you love. But when my sister first died, and I've never really taken the time in 8.5 years to grieve her loss, I wanted this to end. And in my mind's eye, I was a no tax, no regulate, no control. And I'm still a no tax, no regulate, and control. But when people started talking to me about therapeutic medicinal cannabis and passing legislation, I was not a fan of that.
Right.
For the very reason that it's all insane and it shouldn't be that way to begin with. But then I started coming in contact with people that I knew that had conditions that didn't have access to a black market, that needed access to this product. So now when I run into somebody on social media or in public and they say, I don't support this because it's taxed, I don't support this because it's regulated, I don't support this because they're trying to control it, I try to explain to them, you already apparently have access to the black market.
Right.
I'm talking about the sick, suffering, and dying citizens of the state of Alabama that wouldn't know how to access a black market product if it was sitting on the conveyor belt at the checkout counter at your local grocery store. These people need access to this product. Now, it's going to be taxed at 9%. Okay, we can't get around sales tax. We'll never be able to get around that.
Nope.
And this therapeutic cannabis does have an additional tax on it, which I'm not a fan of. We, as an organization, Alabama Ramp, has released a press release with every chance that we could to let them know what we did and what we didn't like about it. And we have had a few things changed. But the Compassion Act, as it is written now, until it goes through the Alabama House, is what it is. I've worked very hard, and a lot of people in the state, not just me, this is not about me. Right. A lot of people in the state have worked to get this legislation where it is. If people aren't happy with it, just tell me which person you would like to die or you would like to suffer because they don't have access to it because you don't support it. Now, if it was your mama, if it was your wife, if it was your sister, if it was your husband, if it was your brother or one of your children or one of your grandparents, which one of those can you look me in the eye and tell me, I don't support this legislation? They're just going to have to suffer. They're just going to have to be sick. They're just going to have to die. Mm-hmm. No, the Compassion Act is going to cover some of that. We'll have to go back year after year to get things added to it. And we're not stopping just with medicinal cannabis legislation. But right now, people need this. They needed it yesterday.
I agree wholeheartedly. Going back to my days as a CEO, everybody was always, oh, they don't need nothing but bread and water, and they need to be doing this and they need to be doing that, talking about inmates. It was always amazing that those same people that would talk all of that stuff about the inmates in the jail, as soon as somebody in their circle, their daughter, their husband, their son, didn't matter, As soon as somebody in their circle got put in there, everything was just crazy and everything was wrong
they
and everything.
needed special treatment. They needed special treatment.
Exactly. It's a
And
whole. It's a whole.
this is something else.
It's a whole
This
lot
is something
different
else that they don't
whenever they're
address.
actually on your front door and you're actually having. It's a part of your world. It's completely different. You can talk all the stuff you want to, but whenever it gets put right in your doorstep, it's always different.
Absolutely. And something else that they don't address, which really, really bothers me within the prison industrial system, is mental health. Many people that are in jail have mental health problems, and we're doing nothing for them. But cannabis helps mental health issues.
I don't know the numbers in front of me. I can just speak from experience, especially after they started shutting down all the mental health facilities in this state because they didn't want to fund it. That's another story and another podcast in itself too. But instead of having a lot of facilities out there to treat the mentally ill or anybody like that, what did they do? They brought them to jail.
Incarcerated. Right.
That's a big issue in this state as well.
You asked me about the cons of cannabis.
Yes, ma'am.
I guess if people don't like to sleep well at night, if you don't like to get a really, really good deep sleep at night, that would be a con. If you don't, when I really can't think of any cons, to be honest with you, Terry.
Well, one of the reasons why I bring that up, as I said a while ago, I'm a fat boy. I'm a glutton. If I eat too much, I get sick. Tylenol and aspirin are fantastic things, and they serve a fantastic purpose. But if I take too many of them, it can do damage to my organs, or it can kill me if I take too many of them at one point in time. And I brought this up to Mr. Heater a couple episodes ago. What is the long-term, if there is any, what are some of the long-term issues of using, if there is such thing as too much or whatever? Because as I said earlier, the closest thing to using cannabis that I've done other than using those CBD pills was I had a contact high at City Stages once when Snoop Dogg was there. It's a true story. It's very true. He got on stage, and if you ever went to City Stages, you know how it was. For those of you that are not from around the Birmingham area, City Stages was an event that was held downtown, and they used to close down streets. They'd set up stages. I'm sure pretty much every big city has some sort of festival like this. But Snoop came to town, and it was right after, I think it was Taylor Hicks from American Idol. He did the deal with American Idol. Snoop brought him on stage, and he bounced around with the harmonica while Snoop sung Gin and Juice. And then Snoop started a couple other songs, and then he stopped and said, I want to smoke something. How many weed smokers we got around here? And I think I was the only one out of about a 2.5 block area that didn't go crazy. And I'm a big boy anyway. I'm 6'7", so I kind of stood above the crowd anyway. As soon as he said that, I said, this ain't going to go good. So I started trying to make my way out. And I heard him say, reach and grab it. And everybody went reaching and grabbing except for me. And then he said, light it up. And I said, oh, gosh. There wasn't nothing but a big white cloud that came up. And there was cops all around, everything else. They didn't do nothing. But yeah, I got sick as a dog, and I craved Taco Bell. I don't know what that was about, but that's the truth.
From a contact high?
I did.
Oh my God.
True story.
Crazy. Well, because I do have, 46 years of experience with cannabis. Now, I think I can speak pretty emphatically that there's nothing been, I semi-retired at 49. So it didn't cause me to be, like a dredge to society. I'm not dependent on the government for anything. I'm healthy to be 61 years old. Most of my friends, are users of cannabis. I wouldn't say that they all are, but a lot of them are, and they're productive members of society. You know, I'm talking about doctors, lawyers, nurses, and Indian chiefs. I mean, these people, and truck drivers, and, you know, I mean, I have people that are very diverse, you know, avenues of employment as friends, but we're not, you know, we're not a drag on society. So I hear people, parents coming out and saying, my son started out smoking cigarettes or drinking beer, and then they started using cannabis, and then they developed a psychosis, and then they committed suicide. Okay. And I do not want to be flippant about this. Anytime anybody takes their own life or kills someone else is absolutely horrible. My heart goes out to them. But when I ask the question, when they say, my child committed suicide because they were using cannabis, or my child committed suicide because they had developed some kind of psychosis, I always ask this question: was this person taking any pharmaceutical medications? I can never get anyone to tell me if their child was, because the guy in the white gave them the drugs. So they don't want to blame the guy in the white coat. But when somebody loses someone that they love, they're always looking for someone to blame, just like I blame pharmaceutical companies for my sister's death. And it's proven. But these people don't want to admit that maybe a pharmaceutical company might have had a side effect that would say may cause suicidal tendencies. So I can't think of any cons.
Well,
I think it ought to be in vending machines in every convenience store around the world.
ain't nothing wrong with
Like Cheez-Its or Cheetos.
it. You know, you brought up in the earlier about the Declaration of Independence, I do believe, where it talked about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I'm a big proponent of the pursuit of happiness. It does not guarantee that you will be.
Absolutely.
It does not guarantee that you will be happy. It guarantees that you are able to pursue it. I don't personally use, but I'm not going to stand in anybody's way who does, if that makes any sense. I'm all for this to get passed. It might not, as you said, it might not be perfect, but it is a step in the right direction. Because if it gets passed, we can always tweak. And if you advocate for it, and you're a strong advocator, and you let your voice be heard, you can keep making changes as long as you don't get comfortable and you don't get satisfied, and you don't let them, being the lawmakers, get comfortable and get satisfied. You can get things changed, and you can get things done.
And typically what happens, Terry, after legislation like this is, and this is all mapped out. Senator Melton, this is a seed to sale. It's a vertical system, seed to dispensary. So the person who plants the seed, grows the seed, harvests the plant, and it manufactures the product, which then goes to a dispensary, okay? And they've got it all ready to be implemented. It will be the fall of 2022, I believe is the way it's set up, before a product will be available. Okay, so we still have a ways to go.
What does it take to be
states,
able to become a grower?
That's not in my wheelhouse. You might want to call the agriculture department.
All right.
But what happens in these states that have passed this legislation? Once these legislators and once the citizens of these states don't realize that the sky's not going to fall, that driving under the influence rates don't go up, that they caught their children smoking a joint and their children didn't become psychotic. Once these states realize that all of these things that they've been told, all this propaganda, the lies, and everything that they've been told is not real, it opens people up to saying, they start hearing stories about people whose bodies had been healed of these various conditions. The most heartbreaking one is children who have epileptic seizures and autism. And then when these legislators see on video within 30 seconds to 45 seconds that this cannabis oil that's put under the tongue in the midst of an epileptic seizure, it ends that quick. When those legislators see that this is something that benefits the people, and then they realize they have somebody in their family that this would benefit, then things start to change. And it's not really a fight. It's just, we need this changed.
Right. Ma'am, I sure do appreciate you coming onto the show, and I welcome you back anytime that you want to come back. As I told you before, I found you via the Libertarian Party of Alabama. I also reached out to them, just a little side note, and asked them if they would like to come onto the show and promote their party, but I hadn't heard anything back from them. So, but that's a side note from another.
I can work on that for you.
Really? I like to consider myself a conservative libertarian if I was going to put a label on my politics whatsoever. And, I just thought that since everybody was talking third party at one point in time, and I figured it might be a good place for them to be able to promote their party. But like I said, I've reached out to several, but I couldn't get any of them to come on. But I am really glad that you were able to come onto the show, and I really thank you for answering me whenever I'd reached out to you. Tell the folks how they can follow you and keep up with you and see how things are going to transpire from here on out.
Well, it's been a pleasure, and I do want to let your audience know that we are on social media. We're on Twitter. It's RAMP Alabama, RAMP Alabama on Twitter. We're on Facebook, Alabama Republicans Against Marijuana Prohibition. That's our Facebook page. We have 14 geographic groups around the state. So if you live in a particular, geographic area, you can find a community of like-minded people in your area. We have like 20 support groups for different health conditions that people have. And we post educational information so people can learn. Hey, this is good for cardiac problems. Hey, this is good for PTSD. And we didn't even talk about the veterans. God, our veterans need this more than probably anybody does, and deserves it probably more than anybody else does. But we are on social media. I'd love for people to look us up. Again, I am a libertarian. I'm really politically homeless, but an elderly lady in her 90s, she's in her 90s now, Ann Lee, she founded Republicans Against Marijuana Prohibition. And if you go on YouTube, you can look up Ann, A-N-N, Lee, L-E-E, RAMP, R-A-M-P, and find the video where she's talking about why she founded RAMP. And that woman is a firecracker. Sometimes when I get kind of discouraged and I think, I just don't know about this, I'll go out there and watch that video of her. And buddy, she's got gray hair, and she gets up there in front of those legislators, and I mean, she just gives it to them and talks about the Jim Crow laws, because the brown and the black people in society are the people that have probably suffered the most because they end up being the dealers. And so it's a very, very interesting thing. I'm proud of being able to be a voice for the citizens of the state of Alabama, but I'm not the only voice by any stretch of the imagination. I just want everybody to know cannabis is the safer choice. We need you to call your legislators. We need you to email them. You can call them after hours when nobody's in the office and leave a message on their voicemail. And it makes it really, really easy because you don't have to talk to anybody if you're nervous. But when you call or you email, just make sure that you say, vote yes on the Compassion Act. And Terry, thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. I really appreciate you coming on, and it's been very educational for me. And I hope that it's been educational for everyone else. Big thanks to Marty Schelper for coming on the porch. Just a quick update to this conversation. On April 7th, the House Judiciary Committee gave a favorable report and passed the Compassion Act to its next phase, which is the Alabama House Health Committee. There is also an event coming up in Huntsville on April 20th. The event starts at, yep, you guessed it, 4:20 p.m. If you are interested or want to get involved, join the Alabama Republicans Against Marijuana Prohibition Facebook group. Marty is an admin there, so make sure you tell her you heard her on Porch Matters. Maybe something has been said on this show that has had a positive impact on your life. Maybe all this show is to you right now is something decent to listen to on your way back and forth to work. If this show has been a positive addition to your life, please give the show a positive rating and leave a review. It won't take you but a minute, and it really would help the show out. For those who are new, if you like what you hear, hit that subscribe or follow button and download the episodes in our archives. Please share your favorite episodes with your friends and family on social media, or just send them a link of the show on a text message. There's a lot of people walking around this world that have never heard the podcast before. Find us on social media by typing in Porch Matters in the search bar. Thank you very much for listening, and you can catch us next time right here on Porch Matters.